We're counting down to our 2020 season of civic engagement. But how do we get here? We'll explore this topic on today's episode of Women Veterans Rock on the Hill.
Welcome to Women Veterans Rock on the Hill, the podcast, and I'm your host, Deborah Harmon-Pugh. In today's episode of Women Vets Rock on the Hill, we're going to talk about some of the highlights and maybe a few of the not so bright lights of our 10th anniversary kickoff celebration. We'll also talk about our countdown to a 2020 season of civic engagement. Here at Women Veterans Rock, we've been on a journey. We've been on a journey for the past 10 years, and now it's time to leverage the power of our past preparation to help us in the start of what we view as a very ambitious season of civic engagement. That's civic engagement in the military community, more engagement in the women's community, and we'll discuss how we are going to lend our voices to public policy as we step into the public square in support of military women and in support of military families. Also in today's episode, I'm going to be joined by a special guest, and I'm very excited that she's here. Our special guest is none other than Miss Gabrielle Wanamaker. She is the founder and the managing director of TrustWorks. She's also the past president of business programs at the Enterprise Center in Philadelphia. She's also our in-house expert for our Women Veterans Mastermind Forum. I couldn't be more excited that she's here with us today. She is here and she and I are going to reflect. We're going to do a retrospective view of the incredible developments that we are achieving at this unique Civic Engagement Institute. As many of you know, the Women Veterans Civic Leadership Institute is a leading post-military civic engagement incubator. We are dedicated to today's military women, and our priority is preparing military women for post-military leadership. So, when our special guest joins us, we're not only going to do a retrospective view, but we're also going to do a projection for opportunities for civic engagement in 2020. Welcome to today's conversation, and after this short break, we'll start today's episode with our Public Policy Watch. Make sure to follow this conversation on our social media pages.
Want to learn more about Women Veterans Rock? Go to our website at www.womenvetsrock.org to learn about our organization, upcoming events, and more. If you're listening to this episode on YouTube, click on the Spotify, Overcast, Apple, or Google Podcast links to subscribe to our show and get notifications of new episodes today.
Today, let's examine Bill 3036. It is entitled Breaking Barriers for Women Veterans Act. It was introduced in Congress on May 28, 2019, and it was introduced by Representative Luis Coera of California. There's 4 key components that I'd like to share with you as we all watch the activity of this particular bill. Breaking Barriers for Women Veterans Act, the 4 key components. 1, Congress will introduce $20 million to retrofit VA medical facilities to support the provision of care specifically to women veterans. Each VA facility must have at least one, a full-timer or part-time women's health provider to train other healthcare providers in how to take care of women veterans. Congress will also authorize another $1 million per year for a women's health care residency program to train primary care and emergency care clinicians on women's health. The other key component is training modules must be made available for VA medical facilities to train them on how to provide gender-specific and gender-sensitive care to women veterans. So I just want to give you a quick update on what we have on hand. This last hearing was held by the Veterans Affairs Subcommittee on Health, and that was done on September 11, 2019. Right now, it's awaiting vote to leave committee. The House of Representatives is where most bills are developed regarding veterans and where they are being introduced. Most bills are currently in waiting to be heard by either the House Committee of Veteran Affairs or other various subcommittees that it might be related to. FYI, the Senate has not introduced any recent relevant legislation in regards to Bill 3036, Breaking Barriers for Women Veterans Act. Please be assured we are going to keep an eye on this bill. We're going to keep an eye on this movement of this bill, and we certainly will keep you posted. And that's today's Public Policy Watch.
Stay tuned. You won't want to miss a conversation with any of our legendary guests, including the dynamic international president of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, that's none other than Valerie Hollingsworth Baker. You can stand up and be counted in our conversation with Stephanie Reed, the new executive director of Philly Counts and her role in America's 2020 Census Initiative, and look forward to meeting Barbara Pittman, the new commander of Washington, D.C.'s historic Women's Post No. 2. Don't forget to join the conversation on social media by using hashtag WVR2020.
Good afternoon. I am excited once again to let you know that we are here with our first show, and that is preparing our countdown to our 2020 season of Civic Engagement. And as I said earlier, we have a special guest who is joining us. That's Miss Gabrielle Wanamaker. And I also want to take this opportunity to introduce our first guest co-host, and that's Miss Lucia Bruce. And I am thrilled that Lucia is here with us today because this is starting at the beginning. This is not only the beginning of Women Veterans Rock podcast, but it also takes us back to take a retrospective view of the work that we've been doing in this space and working with women veterans and military families. So let me introduce our first guest co-host. This is Miss Lucia Bruce. She is the past regional administrator for the Women's Bureau at the U.S. Department of Labor. And in her work at the U.S. Department of Labor, as she prepared for retirement, she was the regional officer for Region 3 as well as Region 4. And I'm delighted to have her here with us today. So, Lucia, welcome.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I am just tickled pink that I have you. And Miss Gabrielle Wanamaker, I want to say hello and welcome to the Women Vets Rock on the Hill, the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, ladies, we're going to have a good time this evening because I just want to talk about some of the things that we've been working on and achieving, and I want to break it down into two components. And the reason why I have you here is because, Lucia, we started this journey back in 2009. And in 2009, the Women's Bureau made a decision to support President Barack Obama's Homeless Women Veterans Initiative. And so I'd just like to talk a little bit about what the direction, the objective, and why that was put on the table, and how we became working together as colleagues for a decade on this particular initiative.
Well, Deborah, the one thing I want to stress is that during President Barack Obama's administration, they wanted to find out how many homeless women veterans were out there. Mm-hmm. They knew in total that there were 165,000 veterans who were homeless, and about 4% of that were women veterans. But they really didn't have any data on homeless women. You and I had worked together on other issues
That's right.
that dealt with women. Pay inequity, unemployment, and now being homeless. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs and the Secretary of Labor, or I should say the Secretary from the Veterans Administration, who was Secretary Shinseki. That's a mouthful.
And you still can pronounce it correctly.
And Secretary Chow, who was from the Department of Labor. They asked the Women's Bureau to gather research information on women, homeless women veterans. So where do you start? So we had to start at shelters with service providers And we did that by going through the various regions of the Women's Bureau and held informational programs. And that's basically how it got started. Mm-hmm. But once we gathered all that information, we had to put it in, I wouldn't say a booklet form, but a guide for those who did not know about homeless women.
And I thank you for bringing that back to memory, because when we started out on this journey, there wasn't any information. We had a difficult time even identifying and crystallizing that population because there was no data. And the forums that we held in churches, in community centers, in those places, we found that women who were either homeless or at risk for homelessness were really all around us. And we were really taken by surprise at all the places and all of the yet to be defined circumstances, such as sleeping from sofa to sofa, living out of their car. And so those circumstances had not been really defined very clearly at that point.
I think if you realize, and I did hear Miss Union say, Gabrielle Union say about the idea of the structure of military, you always think of men. And even with the homeless population, you think of men. And even though they were men who were out on the street, living in the underground subway areas, in shelters, they had a better chance of getting into the shelter than homeless women. A lot of time, homeless women were not by themselves.
Absolutely.
They were with children. And at that time, the shelter system was not the best when it came to homeless women and shelters. Unless you were able to find a shelter that was for homeless women and families, then a woman had a better chance of being safe and secure in the shelter.
So when we started this journey and we began to interact and interview and discuss with individuals about their circumstances and how they were at risk, I don't know if you remember, but that first year was back in March of 2009, and we were at the Boys and Girls Club on Benning Road in Southeast Washington, D.C. Do you remember?
I do remember. The first thing that comes to mind is the 100-year-old.
That was Miss Alice Dixon, and she was among the few women that were still living that served in World War II.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that very vividly. And there was a woman that I met at that time. And so I don't know if you recall this, but when we were there at the Boys and Girls Club, it was 2009, and we were preparing to get geared up for the 2010 census. And we were there with the Census Bureau, who was also looking to interview and hire people. And so we had interview forums happen in one room. We were telling people about the Women's Bureau and resources in the other room, and job fairs and resume writing. And there was a number of women that had interviewed. What was striking, and I'm not sure if I have told you the story again recently, but there was a woman that I met there that day that had interviewed for a job. And I felt certain that because of the quality of her interview and her past experiences, that she would have gotten a position with the Census Bureau during 2010. And some months later, that was in March of 2009, some months later, I saw her again, and that was maybe in like August or something. And I asked her, I said, well, how's your job coming along? What are you doing? And her response was, she didn't take the job. And I was surprised. I thought, what? You didn't take the job? That's what we were there for. And her response was, you didn't know it then, but I was homeless. She said, I didn't look like I was homeless, but the day that I came to the Women's Bureau program, everything I owned was in the trunk of my car.
I remember that.
And when she said to me she had just gotten a job, I'm thinking, how was that possible from April to now? Here we are in August, and you're just getting the job. And it was because we were learning more about women who were at risk of homelessness and didn't have gainful employment. But those were some of the early stories that I recall very vividly when we started working with this initiative for women who were homeless or at risk for homelessness.
I remember a lot of things from that, and especially homeless women who would not even go to the hospital
Right.
because they were too afraid to go through the door because the first person they would see would be a male. And when you're thinking of PTSD or you're talking about sexual assault, which is some of the issues that women veterans still go through to this day, when you go to a VA hospital and the first person you see is a male, then you're afraid to go in there.
That's
of
true.
course, it's different today because of the women's clinics.
So you say it's different today. So we went way back to the beginning of how you and I started this journey together, and your agencies started it, and our organization grew out of it. And I have to tell you, the way that Women Veterans Rock came to be, because after year 1 and 2, we did those focus groups, those listening sessions. We wrote that compendium that was rolled back up into the White House. We wrote a toolkit for providers that provided services to women and military families. And then we found that there was still this need that existed. And as a result, I sat down with you and I said, Lucia, there's this gap that's out there. We really want to do this through our nonprofit organization. And you were very supportive in saying, if this is something that your organization wants to do, just let us know as an agency, how can the Women's Bureau and the Labor Department be supportive of it?
That was a great segue into doing what was necessary for women veterans, because for those who are in the audience and they don't know, when it comes to federal programs, unless you are an agency that is validated to the law, even though the Women's Bureau enhances the law, most of our programs lasted 2 years. So even though we were interested in working with women veterans, and then today, Women's Bureau, they're still working with Women's Bureau, but having contracts or doing specific programs for women veterans, we were only able to do up to 2 years. So when you began talking to me about a program outside of what we were doing, I thought it was wonderful, because this would give a women veteran opportunity to still hear about the information, to still find out about the various resources that were needed for their issues. So I was glad when you started this, and it's been a success ever since.
Well, I thank you, and I applaud the support from you and the agency for this population, because when we started back in 2009, we went through those first 4 or 5 years, and we were supporting and servicing this population in the area of housing, employment, health and family wellness, and financial stability. And then that took us to another intersection. And that next intersection was, we are providing these supportive services, but the women who attended our programs, who were followers and supporters, they needed and wanted more.
We did.
And these were women that we came to understand that weren't necessarily critically underemployed or unemployed. These were women who were working professionals in government agencies and city agencies, first responders, working for the post office, working for the hospital, working for colleges and teaching in classes, but yet they still needed and wanted support. And what we did is we created a vehicle. We created a forum to be able to support them. And that's when we created the Women Veterans Civic Leadership Institute.
And that has become a legacy on its own. For your audience, if they knew those women veterans who were involved in this program, and we call them delegates.
Yes, right.
We call them delegates because they are doing the hard work of finding out where their place is, trying to grab a seat at the table.
That's right. That's our motto. Get a seat at the table. How do you get your seat at the table?
And be a part of the political arena. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
Talking to your congresswoman, man, and making sure that they know the plight of women veterans.
Well, when we developed this concept about getting your, well, not develop the concept of getting your seat at the table, but how do we build a bridge for women who wanted to have a voice in the arena in terms of public policy that affected women veterans and military families and military women. And this forum of the Civic Leadership Institute created an environment where we could begin to teach them and prepare them of how to become delegates on Capitol Hill to talk about policy that could change and affect their lives in a positive way.
I really had never seen so enthusiastic women who were very, very eager to make their issue known to their political statesmen.
Well, I have to tell you, I have been so pleasantly impressed by the passion and the commitment of women that have said they haven't said this, but we characterize it as, how do you transfer that spirit of military service into a spirit of civic engagement? And so we began to develop this we created this framework, and each year would build and build and build and build on itself. So we started out with the Civic Leadership Institute. We started out with, and then we grew into the summer leadership retreat. And because our participants kept coming back for additional growth and engagement, we went to the master's class, and then we started the Mastermind forums. And that's because we had such sophisticated level of interest and desire to be engaged. Well, when we started to cross that bridge and look at how are we going to help women get a seat at the table, we started looking around the community at large to bring in expertise and talent. And that expertise led us to one of our favorite and I guess longest serving guest lecturer, and that's Miss Gabrielle Wanamaker. And Gabrielle, I just want to thank you once again for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor and a privilege.
Well, it's always good to have Miss Gabrielle in the house. And with the Civic Leadership Institute, I made a call to Gabrielle. At that time, she was serving as the Vice President of Business Programs at the Enterprise Center. And actually, I found out about your work from a mutual colleague, and they said you really ought to contact her because she has a lot of experience in working with new and emerging businesses and entrepreneurs. And then when you and I talked, we started talking about how we were going to work this. So maybe you can refresh my memory on how we got to a point of taking this Civic Leadership Institute, these women that have been coming and growing and developing as delegates, and how do we get to this concept of this mastermind?
Yes, absolutely. So it was an honor for me to participate, but it was also an honor to be present and to hear some of the speakers and some of the ideas that were being discussed and brought forward. And not just ideas, but methods for gaining traction in the civic environment. And from that, I felt like we're taking in all this information, and I know the goal was really to have women exercise their power, right, in the civic realm. And I thought, how can we take this information and create a very concrete path from learning to action?
Good.
And I felt that, and part of what you said that really struck me was this idea of taking the spirit of the military to the spirit of civic engagement. Because when I think about military women and when I think about people who serve, there's discipline, right? There's
Absolutely.
Teamwork,
Yes.
right? You're
Yes.
learning new skills, right? And being introduced to situations where you're going to have to be nimble and flexible in order to succeed.
Yes.
And also, you're working to meet a goal. And the whole is larger than your individual contribution, but you can understand that you are playing a part in something that is bigger than yourself, right? So for me, I thought, this is a perfect population, who are well prepared and skilled to really advance some of the needs of women vets and their family, because they have a skill set. There's a lot of people who may come into a volunteer situation or want to promote an idea or make change in their community. And I'm making a big guess, but many don't have the training and the experience that these women have.
You make an excellent point, and you talk about us working with this group of skilled individuals who are well prepared. Earlier, Lucia and I were talking, and she asked about what separates this organization, this population, these programs from other veteran service groups for women. And you brought out an excellent point, and that is many of the women that are in our institute are women who are working in technical professional jobs. I remember last Christmas at one of our graduation forums, one of our delegates says, "Oh my, you have more doctors in this room than you have in the emergency room." And people would be surprised to find that so many of the women that have gone through, served their time, retired, and continued their education. So we had doctors and nurses and school teachers and college professors, and they wanted to know how can they continue to serve in a way that they can give back to the community. And so what you were successful in supporting our initiative was giving us some additional methods and some ways on how we can take just the training and the preparation part and actually take into a place of action.
So we decided, I sort of took the Mastermind model and modified it a little bit.
Okay.
So typically in a mastermind group, you're coming to the table with specific goals that you want to meet. And part of the purpose of the group is to be able to hear what you're thinking, provide you feedback, but also encourage you to move forward, right? Which may include maybe some feedback about how you're framing it or how you're doing it. It's not just a pat on the back. It's a little bit of hard work.
Sure.
And you're getting it from very capable people. So the idea was that the women would come together in groups. So they were looking at post-military careers, looking at continuing education, looking at holistic health and wellness, and also looking at civic engagement, I would say in a broad sense. So meaning in terms of public policy, but also engaging in the community and engaging with other organizations that were supporting the needs of women and becoming part of leadership and being able to add into the dialogue, the experience of women's vets, so that they would not be forgotten as other organizations are building their platforms to move forward.
So what we were able to do is, with your assistance and guidance and other speakers and methods being introduced into the program, we were taking this big bucket of people being interested in civic engagement, and we broke it down into 3 smaller buckets, and that was civic engagement or civic leadership. It was nonprofit leadership and business leadership. And so with civic, business, and nonprofit leadership, it gave us an opportunity to help refine where people were going. It was still broad, but we had individuals who were starting their own business and they found a place in business. We had women who were in corporate America or in the federal government and they were looking to continue to elevate their careers. They found that in business, and business and government. Nonprofit were those individuals who work for nonprofit agencies, big ones, whether we're talking about any of the top 5 nonprofit organizations that did veteran services, and then civic engagement. And that was either through public leadership. We've had 2 people who have run for office here in this organization. And so we were successful in being able to craft this space where people could come, be planted together, bloom together, and then go out, because the goal was to create an environment where women who served in the military could come out and affect a change in civilian public life.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, ladies, we have been working on this together for a number of cycles and a number of seasons. What do you think is the legacy that Women Veterans Rock is making for itself in this past 10 years, and how do we leverage that on where we want to go forward? Because we're looking at this countdown to our 2020 season, and there's a lot of work for women, for the military community on hand. So first, what sort of things do you think that we've put in place in terms of building a legacy? And then second, we're going to close with talking about the work that we see that this group, this population is prepared to do. Lucia.
I want to say that right off the bat, we elevated the ladies or the members of Women Veterans Rock by calling them delegates. Mm-hmm. That's a word that has responsibility to it.
Absolutely.
And that legacy of being a delegate alone is what has propelled them through this process.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because we started this out in terms of defining this group as Women Veterans Rock. And as our program matured and we became, we got some clarity on the needs of the women in this community, we started using the term very intentionally, military women. And so when you talk about ways in which we've been working to elevate women, we certainly continue to salute and pay honor and tribute to those women who served in uniform. And that is why we call it Women Veterans Rock. But our community is expansive. It is National Guard, reservists, ROTC cadets, military moms and military spouses.
That's what I was getting ready to bring up, is especially the junior ROTC. Mm-hmm. They're seeing that they have a legacy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're seeing that they're able to pursue those careers, either military or outside of the military.
That's true.
Because they've been a part of this leadership program.
True. That's true. So what are your thoughts, Gabrielle?
Well, as a relative newcomer, I'm always impressed, and I won't say astonished, but close, when I hear all of the successes that you have had over time, mm-hmm. and all of the impact that you have had. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're moving towards change, there's a little uncertainty.
That's true.
But everybody wants to be on a winning team.
That's
right?
true.
Nobody signs up for a losing team. Right?
I know I don't.
So one of the things that I would like to see is some celebration of those successes. And maybe in a concrete visual way, so that you capture the impact that you have had over time, so that people really understand the transformative power of this organization, right? Because it's so impressive. Like, every time I come, I learn another aspect. I'm like, this is incredible, right?
I really thank you for saying that, because as we are counting down to our season of civic engagement, we are so focused on how can we continue to make our mark in all of the important institutions in civilian life that our women represent. And you put out something that's really important in terms of the celebration of our success, because there has been a lot of success here. And I want to tell you, ladies, you two have been an integral part of this. Lucia, Bruce, you have been here from the beginning. You haven't missed one single step in doing this program, and I hope that you realize the kind of mentor that you have served for women in this space. And coming out of the U.S. Department of Labor in a high-level position in the Women's Bureau, it's really been impactful, because it demonstrates to women in this organization that somebody in a high-level government position really cares and continues to contribute. So you've been a mentor, whether you've known it or not, all these years, and so we thank you for your contribution to this.
It has truly been an honor.
So I thank you both, and your support has just been immeasurable, and I look forward to having you back on this show again.
Deborah, if I could just say one thing, it has been an honor, again, to work with Women Veterans Rock, but it's also been an honor to work with you.
Well, thank you for that.
This would not have been a successful program if it wasn't for you. Mm-hmm. You have been the type of person that has been truly dedicated to women veterans, whether or not they're homeless, professional, or whatever you want to say, or whatever name you want to label it. Mm-hmm. But this Women Veterans Rock would not have been successful if you had not been behind it. I enjoy being here. I enjoy coming to it. I enjoy working with you and Gabrielle. And hopefully it's only for another year. But
you can't leave before I leave.
But if it's not, I am still honored to do whatever I can do to help any women veteran or woman out there who needs our support.
Well, ladies, we all make up this beautiful, rich tapestry, this fabric that we have woven together that's created this really dynamic, living, organic organization. And we couldn't have done it without one another. And so I think that we represent what it is that we profess, and that is having women work together, that is empowering other women, and that is continuing to move the process forward on how we can improve the lives of our children and the lives of our grandchildren. And here at Chestnut Hill College, there's a philosophy, and I look at it every time I walk through the Hall of Philanthropy, and you guys probably have heard me say it quite a bit, and that is, you make a living by what you get, but you make a life by what you give. And so I want to thank you for all that you've given to this organization.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to be notified of upcoming episodes. And join us in the public square for more conversations, including 100 Years of Finer Womanhood, Stand Up and Be Counted, and a look inside the revitalization of the American Legion's Washington, D.C. Historic Women's Post No. 2.
Women Veterans Rock continues to salute America's military women in their post-military roles of public leadership. Today, we salute Consuela Castillo Kickbush. She's a retired lieutenant colonel of the U.S. Army. Consuela was born and raised along the border in a small barrio in Laredo, Texas. She overcame poverty, discrimination, and illiteracy to become the successful community leader she is today. In 1996, she was selected out of 26,000 candidates to assume a command post, which would put her on track for rank of a general officer. She respectfully declined the honor, and Consuela retired as a 22-year veteran of the U.S. Army to fulfill her mother's dying wish. That wish was for Consuela to return to her roots and become a community leader. In realizing her dream, she founded Educational Achievement Services Incorporated with a mission to prepare tomorrow's leaders. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Consuela Castillo Kickbush, you are a Women Veterans rock star and this week's Shining Star on the Hill. One last thing before we go. In regards to our fall kickoff celebration and podcast launch party event at Chestnut Hill College, I am humbled, grateful, and I am encouraged by a groundswell of enthusiasm we ignited as we began our fall season at the Women Veterans Civic Leadership Institute. We're military women moving by faith as we count down to our 2020 season of civic engagement, and we have accepted the charge to bloom and to lead in this space as military women leaders in civic leadership, business leadership, and nonprofit leadership in our post-military service to America. As a new delegation of women leaders, I personally thank you for the vote of confidence that you have given me as an ambassador of this great delegation of women. And in the words of the great Wayne Gretzky, I don't skate to where the puck is going, I skate to where the puck is going to be. Now, Joe, take us home.
Hey everyone, this is Jay Latrey, the audio producer for Women Vets Rock, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed the music in today's episode, please feel free to check out my Instagram at Latrey Music, where I'm constantly posting new music and upcoming releases. Wishing you peace, love, and nothing but the best. Latrey signing out.